Hello, I have a few books to talk to you about today, including my first five-star read of the year. And I am excited to get into it, so let's just go ahead and get going. The first book that I'm going to talk to you about is The Colony. This is by Annika Norlin. The Colony is translated from Swedish. I will put the name of the translator up on the screen, and it is a work of literary slash contemporary fiction. I would say probably more on the literary side, just because of the writing style and a bit of the formatting of the way the writing appears on the page and that kind of thing. There is a little bit more of an emphasis on the writing style than I think is common in contemporary fiction, so that's why I would say it leans a little bit more on the literary side. This was published in 2023, and it follows the story of Emily, who is out on a camping trip after having experienced burnout. Burnout from work, burnout from love, burnout from life and technology, and all of those things that can just be overwhelming on a day-to-day basis when adulting. And she decides to take a break, goes out into the wilderness to just go camping on her own. And while she is there, she comes across and sees in the distance a group of people who come walking down a trail, and they obviously are all united together in some sort of community or group or commune or cult or colony. She starts to kind of observe their behavior, which is a little unusual, and yet they also seem very close. And she finds herself wondering, who are these people and why are they there? And that is largely the underlying message in this book, is just exploring how do people end up in a certain place, what brings them there, why do they stay, and how does a community or a colony come into existence. And you go through this book traveling back and forth to different times and to different points of view, just sort of learning more about the people that she's met, learning more about our protagonist herself, and exploring their backgrounds. And so you do go back into the past, and then you come forward, and then you spend some time in the present with these characters, and it's a really interesting journey. As you would expected, based on the location as well as the groups of people, this book covers a variety of topics, including isolation, community, found family, burnout of all types, as well as the influence of technology on our lives. There's a little bit of climate fiction going on in the background, but that doesn't get too heavily introduced into the book. And you definitely get some discussion of ants and ant colonies, as you would expect from the cover of the book. The high in this book for me definitely surrounded the characters and the characterization. As I mentioned, there is the protagonist, Emily. I think that's how you say her name. I will put it up on the screen. And there are the various people in this group that she meets. And you spend a decent amount of time with each character, though there is a lot of bouncing around from person to person. So that's something to consider when reading this book, is that you will change points of view and the time period that you're looking at that person quite a bit. But once I got used to it, I really found it was a fascinating way to explore each of these individuals. And I really felt like the author did a good job of making them feel distinct and unique and interesting in their own right. I didn't feel like there was one character that I wanted to follow or one character that I was annoyed when we went back to or anything like that. I really liked learning about all of them. Some of them were more likable than others, but I thought there was a good balance of that as well. I also thought that the character development was really good over time. There was quite a few things that came up with each of the characters that I wasn't expecting and that I thought I knew something about them, and then realized, well, maybe I was, sort of coming to conclusions a little too early. The lows in this book for me, I think there was really only one major thing that was a drawback in reading this book, and that was that the pacing at the start of the book felt a little too slow, and not the very start. Really, you got into the inciting event pretty quickly, and I thought things started moving along. It was really more the flashback part where we built up what happened to these people in the past. I felt like took up too much of the book and made the book feel a little slow paced, especially as I was trying to figure out what was happening. I would say probably half this book just has to do with who these people used to be, which almost feels right, but there was just something about the pacing in that part that felt off, and so it just ended up making the book feel too long, which I don't think the book really was too long. It's not that big a book overall. I think it's just barely 400 pages, and I think that's right for the story it's trying to tell. I think just more of the book should have been set in the present, or that it should have been split half and half. And I feel like part of the reason that so much of this book was spent in the past was because there were so many people's past you had to go into. And so I think it just started to feel like, oh, okay, we still have to learn about this person or that kind of thing. And then when you learned about them, you were happy about it, but somewhere in there, something needed to be condensed. And I couldn't say what, but that was just the overall feeling that I was left with the book. I did end up rating this book 4 stars, so no, it's not my 5-star read, but it was really good, which I was expecting. At this point, I do feel like Europa editions are really reliable. I thought it was a really, really fascinating exploration into just like why people will come together and why they will stay together for better or for worse. And I really appreciated the character work that the author did with that. Like I said, I would recommend this book to anyone who likes character studies, who likes books that are told from multiple points of view, and who likes to consider why groups of people come together and stay together and work together. And, maybe even the intersection of that with ant colonies. I think this book also had a slight feel of a thriller. It's not a thriller by any means, but if like that light thriller vibe where you feel like, oh, is everything going to go wrong? Maybe yes, maybe no. This might also appeal to you as a reader. I don't feel like this is like a lot of other books that I've read, so I really don't have a lot of like other books to read, or if you liked this, if you liked those, try this. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth a try if any of the things that I mentioned about it interest you. I did finish a couple other books since my last reading wrap up, but I'm just going to mention them briefly here because they're going to come up in other videos. So one is The Odyssey by Homer. I read this as part of my high school required reading challenge that I'm doing with my friend Alex, and we have a live show that we're doing where we're discussing all our thoughts and feelings about rereading this book that at least I was required to read in high school. And yeah, we both have a lot of thoughts. It was really interesting to go back through that. And then the other book that I'm going to discuss in a different video is The Betrothed by Alessandro Manzoni. This is a classic work of Italian literature. It is solidly historical fiction, and I think it has a lot of charm and importance, particularly in Italian literature and in the Western canon in general. However, I did DNF this book, and I got a good chunk of the way through it. However, I'm not going to talk about it here. I don't usually go into deep depth about books that I DNF'd. However, I have decided this year to set aside like a couple times a year to talk about books that I've DNF'd and why I've DNF'd them. So sadly, this book is going to show up in that video, which will probably come out in April, is what I'm guessing. So that brings me to my final book, which is my first 5-star read of the year. So if you were paying attention when I flashed all the books at the very beginning, then you would know that my first 5-star read is The Power by Naomi Alderman. So this is a book that I thought I would like. I was surprised how much I liked it from the very beginning all the way through the end. But before I get into why I liked it, let me tell you about this book. This was first published in 2016, and it is, I would say, a work of speculative fiction on the dystopian side, but I would definitely say it's more work of speculative fiction because it's not going to feel like a dystopian novel for the vast majority of the book, at least not in the sense that most people think about it, where you're starting in a world where everything's already a mess. Then again, that's a matter of opinion, so you might think that, this represents the modern world and it's already a mess. So who knows? Anyway, let me tell you about this book. This is a story that explores the idea of what happens when one day people wake up and all the women and all the girls in the world suddenly hold all the power in their hands. Literally, they have power in their hands. Like they have electric power in their hands that they can shock and really hurt and or unalive people with. And so the book explores from the time that this happens all the way to sort of the culmination and conclusion of where this would all lead. And it's a really interesting way that the author chose to explore this idea. There is actually a framing narrative to the story that I just told you about. And I'm not going to share what that is because I think that will be interesting for you to figure out yourself. And it'll be pretty obvious because the story opens with it. But this is definitely a story story that is told within another story. And I wasn't expecting that, and I really kind of liked how that worked. There is also an element of this book that is definitely some metafiction going on, and it also falls into the category of ergodic fiction or mixed media, which is another element in this book I wasn't expecting. There are pictures in here. There are grayed out pages. It's hard to tell, I know, but these pages are gray. That's not just the lighting, it's very light gray here. And that's because that is a different form of media within the book. I mentioned there are illustrations. There's also some emails that are formatted slightly differently. There's like a Discord or Reddit discussion or something like that going on in the book. So that also kind of mixes things up a bit, and it works really well in the book. This book definitely discusses a couple of topics in depth, including power dynamics, gender roles, religion, and it's definitely a societal critique, particularly on gender and the abuse of power. For me, the high in this book was hands down the themes and the topics that Naomi Alderman discusses in this book. I was really impressed by the number of discussions she was able to include in this book on various things related to gender and power, and how one gender holding all the power, like just how much that determines things in either a patriarchal or a matriarchal society. I would say the main discussion in this book has to do with power, but it's definitely looking at how that affects gender. And I just think the number of areas that she shows are affected by power and who is in power is really dynamic and interesting and just exciting to read about, even though it can get very dark at the same time. Overall, as heavy as the topics were in this book, I didn't feel like it was depressingly dark because it is pretty fast paced. And so it does read more like an adventure or thriller novel because things are still happening in the world at the time. It's not like the people are already in power. And I think that also gave the book a really interesting edge and kept the book fast paced because it was showing how things were changing because this new event happened, as opposed to truly being dystopian and showing just the aftermath. So that was definitely like the part that I really enjoyed. I think just also, I guess that also includes the plotting of the book itself. If there was any low, which it's hard for me to say there really was, it probably came at the end when we went back into the framing narrative. I was definitely expecting us to wrap up by coming back out of the embedded narrative. It just kind of makes sense. Otherwise, you don't have a complete frame. However, I felt like that part of the book just started to get a bit too long, and I was afraid we were going to go sort of an info dumpy or info messaging direction. But she pulled it back just in time, and I was left at the very, very end going, okay, fair. I'm glad you did that. So I think that's why this book ended up being 5 stars for me. At the end of the day, just everything she attempted, I felt like was really well developed and wrapped up, not perfectly, not neatly, but enough to keep you questioning and thinking about all the things that she brought up. And for me, that is one of my favorite elements in books. I like them to make me think about different topics and ideas, and to make me want to continue to think about those things. This is a book that I would recommend to anyone who's interested in exploring the dynamics of power, especially as how it relates to gender, and who likes to think about like what would happen if gender roles were changed or that kind of thing. So if you like speculative fiction, I think this would be a really good book for you, especially compared to dystopian. I think it's solidly more speculative than dystopian. You do have to be okay with some darker themes and darker actions happening in the book. So I would say look up content warnings if that's something that you're sensitive to. If you want to read more books like this, the one that definitely stands out to me would be Agalia's Daughter. I think that's the book that this most reminds me of. But I think there's other books that have interesting conversations about gender and gender roles as well. Like Flatland is another one that I'm thinking of, which is a more lighthearted look at the role of genders and people in life. But in that one, it has more to do with math, and it's definitely lighthearted. or more lighthearted. So that is The Power. I was super excited to read this and have a 5-star read. And yeah, I think it was just the quality of writing and the topics and the way it was handled, everything. This is a book that I just flew through, and I definitely see myself reading it again at some point in the future. And I think it would be a great book for book club discussions if you're looking for a good book club read. So that is it. That is everything that I had going on. I did read all of these in the last few weeks. Like I said, Betrothed, I read probably 400 of the 600 pages. And yeah, this was the one that's the winner. And my guess is that that's probably going to be my best book of the month, but we will see. So let me know how your reading is going, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.